We will continue to support a negotiated resolution on this matter. We fully support the European Union's role as an observer to the AU-led process, and we as Ireland stand ready to assist as needed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Merci.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Ireland for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me begin by thanking Special Envoy of Secretary General for the Horn of Africa, Mr. Onanga Anyanga, and Ms. Inger Anderson, Executive Director of UNEP, for their briefings. I welcome the presence of the Honorable Foreign Ministers of Egypt and Sudan, and the Water, Irrigation and Energy Minister of Ethiopia, and the Chargé d'Affaires of the Democratic Republic of Congo in today's meeting. India is closely following the developments on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The river basin of Nile encompasses 11 countries in Africa, which also includes Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. Therefore, there is no doubt that this is a complex transboundary water dispute involving many countries in the region, as well as several legal and technical issues. We recognize that the parties have already undertaken several initiatives to address issues arising out of construction and filling of GERD in Ethiopia. These include the establishment of an international panel of experts in 2012 to examine the dam's design and construction plans, a follow-up tripartite national committee in 2014, and the 2015 Declaration of Principles on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. We believe that these initiatives, particularly the 2015 Agreement on Declaration of Principles, provide a good basis to continue negotiations aimed at reaching an amicable solution that protects the interest of all three countries. It goes without saying that the Nile water usage should benefit people of all countries, respecting the rights of both upper and lower riparian states. The chair of the African Union, South Africa in 2020, and the Democratic Republic of Congo in 2021 have made commendable efforts to facilitate a meaningful discussion along with the observers. There have been many meetings of the African Union on this issue last year. We understand from the 26 June 2020 AU communique that these tripartite negotiations have brought about agreement on 90% of the issues, though not all the issues. As a lower and upper riparian state, India is only too aware of how difficult such negotiations can be. It is important that AU continues with these efforts in good faith. We call on Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan to work constructively with the AU-led process with a view to resolving the outstanding issues in a purposeful manner and with the urgency it deserves. Since AU is seized of the matter, it is important that all parties engaged urgently to find a way forward. Based on our own experience, we know that transboundary water disputes should ideally be resolved through mechanisms agreed upon by the primary stakeholders and taking into account the respective rights and issues of technical details, historical usage, and socio-economic aspects. India is of the view that the countries should continue their bilateral engagements as well as cooperate fully and in a focused manner with the AU to reach a mutually acceptable long-term solution for the relevant issues. Only such a solution would endure and serve the developmental needs of upper and lower riparian regions. We also urge other interested countries to support the efforts of the AU in this regard. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of India for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Niger. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would like to thank SRSG Parfait Onanga and Ms. Inger Anderson, Executive Director of UNEP, for the quality of their briefings. I welcome the representative of the DRC and thank him for the message delivered on behalf of the current chair of the AU. I note with satisfaction the participation of the ministers of Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan in this meeting. Mr. President, this is now the second time that the Council is considering the issue of the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The GERD is an infrastructure project with immense potential, but its operationalization has regrettably become a source of misunderstanding between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan for many years. Their presence here in the Council today attests to the clear will of the three neighbors to resolve this misunderstanding peacefully and amicably. Niger fully supports the ongoing negotiation process under the aegis of President Félix Antoine Tshisekedi, current chair of the African Union, and calls on the parties present to show more political will by giving the Technical Negotiating Committee of the African Union the possibility to formulate compromise proposals which they will accept in order to finalize the 10% of outstanding issues as soon as possible. It is equally important that the parties refrain from any comments and other actions that could undermine the ongoing negotiation process. There can be disagreements between brothers, but between brothers, we should be able to overcome them because peaceful coexistence is priceless. Successful examples of cooperation exist in Africa in this area. Niger, as a member of a water management mechanism, namely the Niger Basin Authority, would like to share its experience in the area of shared management of the exploitation of natural resources in the Niger Basin. Indeed, the 9 states of West and Central Africa, which make up the Niger Basin, have agreed on a strategy for the management and the rational, sustainable use of the waters of the Niger River by all states through the Niger Basin Authority, which was set up in 1980. The successful example of cooperation in the exploitation of water resources can serve as a source of inspiration for a rapid solution to the issue of the GERD in particular, and for the sustainable exploitation and management of the Nile's water resources between all riparian countries in the future. Mr. President, by way of conclusion, Niger welcomes the communiqué resulting from the virtual meeting of the heads of state and government of the Bureau of the AU Assembly held on June 24, 2021, which reaffirms the ongoing consideration of this dispute by the organization. By virtue of the principle of subsidiarity, we launch an appeal to all to prioritize a regional and African solution to the GERD issue. To this end, we remain convinced that under the auspices of the African Union, the parties will succeed in making every effort to ensure that the GERD is a source of shared development and prosperity that will contribute to strengthening solidarity and cooperation between the 3 countries. Egypt, Ethiopia, and the Sudan, Mr. President, are major countries with major civilizations in Africa and have contributed to the settlement of several crises on the continent. And I'm sure that they will be up to the challenge in order to overcoming this new challenge. I thank you, Madam President. I thank the representative of Niger for his statement, says the President, and I now give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Presidente.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We thank the Special Envoy Onanga Anyanga, the Executive Director Anderson, and the representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo on behalf of the Chair of the African Union for their briefings. We also welcome the Foreign Affairs Ministers of Egypt and Sudan and the Minister of Water, Irrigation and Energy of Ethiopia. Mexico has closely followed the tripartite negotiations between Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the GERD. We recognize the importance of the Nile for the livelihoods and well-being of the 3 countries, and we therefore understand that this question can be seen through various prisms: political, technical, development and security, and we must be receptive to all of these. We regret the fact that despite the good offices of the leadership of the African Union, there is still no notable progress in this process. It is of concern that the dispute could exacerbate tensions in the region and in the relationships between the 3 countries, which are so significant not only for the Horn of Africa, but for the whole continent. Madam President, we have noted the positions expressed by the 3 countries in various letters sent to the Security Council. Whilst the Council must be attentive to any matter which has the potential to convert into a threat to international peace and security, in this case there must be a constant attempt at prevention in line with Chapter 6 of the Charter of the United Nations. Mexico's position regarding international disputes, particularly those which affect a number of countries simultaneously, has always been to promote, above all, a peaceful and mutually acceptable solution for all the parties, based upon dialogue. Moreover, as this is a question which affects 3 African countries and based on Chapter 8 of the Charter, we deem it to be of particular importance for the international community to back the efforts of the African Union to bring positions closer together and resume negotiation, taking into account the proven ability of this regional organisation to seek African solutions to problems which affect that continent. We call upon the parties to continue with dialogue in good faith and to move towards an agreement on the filling and operation of the dam, so that within a reasonable time a solution can be reached which is satisfactory and beneficial for the 3 countries and for the whole region. Mexico supports the regional mediation and all actions aimed at political dialogue and technical understandings. In this regard, the continued involvement of the African Union is welcome and very necessary. Mexico urges all the parties to abstain from any actions which could jeopardize the negotiations or undermine the necessary goodwill to reach an agreement. Moreover, any actions of dissuasion or pressure must be avoided, so as to prevent any unnecessary escalation in tension. Madam President, just as the representative of Niger has just been saying, Mexico has a long history of shared administration of cross-border water resources, both on our northern and southern borders. We are therefore very aware of the great relevance and complexity which come with managing a resource so vital as water. One example is the International Boundary and Water Commission, established by Mexico and the United States since 1889. Mexico has also established a similar mechanism with Belize and Guatemala. These institutions are devoted to implementing treaties on boundaries and waters between our neighbouring nations and have allowed for the construction, operation and maintenance of relevant infrastructure for the management of cross-border rivers. Perhaps these could serve as a template, with the necessary adaptations to this situation, to the future rounds of negotiation between Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan. We are more than willing to offer further details on these arrangements if the parties consider this useful. But even with agreements of this kind, we must be aware that the management of water resources is never immune from disputes. The crucial thing in this case is to have a shared reference framework and the appropriate mechanisms to address disputes and avoid any escalation from a technical level to a political one. Finally, Madam President, I underscore the fact that my country will continue to follow developments on the ground, and we will always seek, here and in other fora, to support a peaceful, negotiated solution, as well as any efforts at preventative diplomacy. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Mexico, and I now give the floor to the representative of Vietnam.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to begin by warmly welcome His Excellency Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, Sudan, and Minister of Irrigation, Water, Electricity of Ethiopia to our meeting today. I welcome Chargé d'Affaires of Democratic Republic of the Congo on behalf of the chairperson of the African Union to this meeting. I'd like to thank HIRG for the Horn of Africa and the Director General of the UNEP for their insightful briefing. President, water resources play a critical role in supporting the livelihood of billions of people on Earth and the countless ecosystem. Sustainable and equitable use of water resources is therefore vital to secure peace, security, and economic development, as well as the protection of the nature. Therefore, we are concerned about the tendency that many international water courses have been increasingly utilized in a manner that not ensure the legitimate right and interests of riparian countries, especially downstream countries. The adverse effect of this tendency, compounded by those of climate change, have posed significant challenges to security, stability, and development of many regions, including in Africa, where the lives of millions of people depend on shared rivers. We believe that the use of water resources for development purposes is a legitimate right of any concerned party, be it water surplus or water deficit country. We also believe in the best practices on transboundary water courses including the adequate exchange of views, consultation, and full implementation of legal frameworks among concerned stakeholders to address outstanding issues. Furthermore, the utilizations of international watercourses must be in line with the international law and commitment of concerned parties, on the basis of harmonizing the interests of riparian state, upstream and downstreams, to ensure the sustainable use and equitable share of water resources. We would like to emphasize the importance of fostering further codifications and development of international law regarding the sustainable use of transboundary watercourses, including through the implementation of United Nations Convention on the Law of non-navigational uses of international watercourses. President, as to the Blue Nile River, we take note of the position of the relevant parties, including those as elaborated in the letters addressed to the President of Security Council recently. We support the efforts of the party directly concerned to promote sustainable and equitable utilization of water resources, including through the cooperation, consultation, and negotiation on the Grand Ethiopian Reduction Dam GERD project. It is our wish that all parties concerned build upon achieved results and fully implement the 2015 agreement on the declaration of principle of the project. We take note of the effort by all sides over the last year in their negotiation. And given the ongoing fragile situation in the region, it is, however, important that the related party uphold the principle of settling disputes through peaceful means, continue their dialogue and meaningful negotiation, take into account the view and legitimate interests of each other in the spirit of neighborly brotherhood and good faith, as well as in accordance with the international law and 2015 agreement. Mr. President, as having stated time and again here, we always support the important role of the African Union in upholding its responsibility and promoting negotiation and mediation on the issue of its region, as shown over the last year on the GERD issues. Given the continued stalemate, we are of the view that it is high time that the AU accelerates its efforts in assisting the three countries to resolve the remaining issues, including legal and technical questions. And in this connection, all parties should refrain from any measures that might escalate tension and undermine the opportunity to achieve a negotiated solution to the issues. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Vietnam for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席先生。
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, China welcomes the Foreign Minister of Egypt, Sukri, the Foreign Minister of Sudan, Mary Al-Hamdi, and also the Minister of the Water, Irrigation and Energy of Ethiopia, Mr. Saleshi Bekele Olechu, for attending this meeting. And China welcomes the Foreign Minister Christophe Dula, through Chargé d'Affaires of DRC Permanent Mission, and also the Special Representative Anyanga and Executive Director Inger Anderson for their briefings. Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan are all at an important stage of development, and the Nile River is of great significance to the life and development of the three countries. China supports the three countries in reaching an agreement on the Transboundary Water Cooperation Program through dialogue and consultation for the sustainable management and utilization of the Nile water so that all the riparian countries can benefit from it. China believes that through joint efforts, the completion of GERD can become a tripartite development project to enhance mutual trust and win-win cooperation. China attaches great importance to the issue of GERD and appreciates the fact that in 2015, the three countries signed a Declaration of Principles on GERD through dialogue and negotiations and held multiple rounds of negotiations under the auspices of the AU. The AU has made lots of efforts to facilitate the tripartite negotiations, and China appreciates the active role played by President Tshisekedi and President Ramaphosa as current and former AU presidents. China has noted the positions expressed in their recent letters sent to the Council by the foreign ministers of Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan. The utilization of transboundary water resources involves the distribution of national interests upstream and downstream, which is very complex and sensitive. China fully understands the legitimate concerns of Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan regarding GERD. On this issue, China remains consistent in its position that the parties should resolve their differences through dialogue and consultation and achieve mutual benefit and win-win results. African countries have a fine tradition of resolving regional problems through dialogue and consultation. Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan are all important countries in the region and good friends of China. And China sincerely hopes that the three parties and three countries, in the spirit of friendly cooperation, will resume dialogue and consultation as soon as possible, reach an agreement at an early date on a solution acceptable and beneficial to all three, and look forward to the AU's continued dual role. The international community, including this Council, should support the three countries in resolving their differences through dialogue and consultation, and to that end create a favorable external environment to jointly maintain peace, stability, and development in the African region. China stands ready to continue to play a constructive role along with all the parties. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of France. I welcome the presence at the Security Council table of the Foreign Affairs Ministers of Egypt and Sudan and the Minister of Water of Ethiopia. I thank Mr. Onanga, Ms. Anderson, and the Chargé d'Affaires of the Democratic Republic of the Congo for their statements. And I wish to underscore 3 points. It is the responsibility of the Security Council to avoid a prolonged dispute from becoming a threat for maintaining international peace and security. This is why it was important to convene this meeting. All of the parties have legitimate interests, but after 10 years of negotiations, trust has been shattered. In the absence of a prior agreement, the continued filling of the reservoir of the dam stokes tensions. Given that regional stability is currently fragile, the priority is to avoid adding to the challenges already faced by each country. I'm thinking first of the democratic transition in the Sudan, whose success is a priority for France. I'm thinking of the challenges faced by Egypt to meet the needs of its people. And I am thinking of the development challenges in Ethiopia. The Tigray conflict has fueled other tensions, particularly in the zone of the El Fashaga Triangle. Against this backdrop, we call upon the countries of the regions to exhibit political will to resolve their disputes through dialogue with the support of the African Union. Indeed, the solution can only come as a result of dialogue between the parties themselves. We call upon them to abstain from any action which could jeopardize the continued discussions and to the establishment of a negotiated solution. France welcomes the efforts of the chairmanship of the African Union to support the negotiations, and particularly the personal mobilization of President Ramaphosa and now of President Tshisekedi. These efforts must continue and be stepped up. We encourage the United Nations to continue to contribute their expertise to this process, and we encourage the three parties to accept a more active role by the observers to the negotiations. France is convinced that an agreement can be found rapidly between the parties on the filling and management of the Renaissance Dam. there are elements of convergence which negotiations under the auspices of the African Union must make use of. France solemnly calls upon Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan and their sense of responsibility, compromise and cooperation so as to resolve pending questions as soon as possible. France will remain mobilised so as to ensure that a negotiated solution can be found as swiftly as possible. I resume my function as President of the Council, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Sameh Shoukry, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Egypt.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Your Excellency Ambassador de Rivière, Permanent Representative of France to the United Nations and President of the UN Security Council, distinguished representatives of the member states of the United Nations Security Council, dear sister, the Foreign Minister of Sudan, and dear brothers, the representatives of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and of Ethiopia. At the outset, I would like to extend my congratulations to Ambassador de Rivière on assuming the presidency of the Security Council and to thank Under-Secretary General Inger Anderson, the Executive Director of UNEP, and the UN Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa for their remarks. Mr. President, Egypt, a nation of over 100 million souls, is facing an existential threat. A grand structure of mammoth proportion has been constructed across the artery that bequeaths life to the people of Egypt. A colossal wall of iron and steel has arisen along the banks of a great and ancient river and has cast a long and dark shadow over the future and fate of the people of Egypt. With every brick and every layer of mortar, the gird grows higher and its reservoir grows larger, and it continues to constrict the lifeblood of innocent millions living downstream of this giant dam. Last year, on June 29, 2020, Egypt came before the Security Council to warn the international community of this burgeoning danger that was brewing on the horizon. We alerted the world to the impending first filling of the gird, and we cautioned against the cost of seeking to establish exclusive control over a river on which our survival depends. We implored this august body to act with vigilance and vigor, to avert an escalation of tensions that could prejudice the peace in a fragile region. We called upon our brethren, with whom we share the riches of the Nile, to exercise responsibility and to recognize that the future and fortunes of our peoples are intrinsically intertwined. And yet, within days of the previous Security Council session held on the question of the gird, the Rubicon was crossed. Ethiopia commenced the unilateral filling of the gird, and its foreign minister declared, with no small measure of impudence, and I quote, "The river became a lake. The Nile is ours," end of quote. Nonetheless, Egypt's response to this assault on the river was to act with restraint and pursue the path of peace by seeking a settlement to this crisis through an equitable agreement that preserves the interests of all three parties. We wholeheartedly embraced the initiatives of the then chairperson of the African Union, His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, to initiate negotiations under the auspices of the African Union. And we engaged in a whole year of talks that were convened and facilitated by our African brethren to forge an African solution to this intractable problem. And yet, we have failed. After a year of abortive negotiations, and despite the tireless efforts of the chairpersons of the African Union and our international partners, we find ourselves again confronted by the reality of the unilateral execution of the filling of the gird without an agreement to protect downstream communities against the dangers of this dam. Indeed, in a further demonstration of its obstinacy, Ethiopia announced on July the 5th, 2021, a mere 3 days before the convening of this very session, that it has commenced the second-year filling of the GERD without an agreement. This blatant act of unilateralism is not only a manifestation of Ethiopia's irresponsibility and its callous indifference to the damage that the filling of this dam could inflict upon Egypt and Sudan, but it also illustrates Ethiopia's bad faith and its attempt to impose a fait accompli in defiance of the collective will of the international community as expressed and embodied in the holding of the Security Council session to discuss and take action on the question of the GERD. And in this regard, I take note and commend the European Union for issuing a statement today expressing regret that Ethiopia has begun executing the second filling without an agreement. And I encourage the Security Council and its member states to take a similar position in response to this deeply troubling development, something which has not been displayed in today's interventions. This persistent practice of unilateralism betrays Ethiopia's disregard, if not its contempt, of international law and reflects its underlying policy objectives of seeking to arrest the Nile and transform this transboundary river of life into an instrument of political influence and control, all of which threatens to undermine peace and security in the region. This is why, Mr. President, Egypt has elected to again bring the question of the GERD before the Security Council. Ethiopia's unrelenting unilateralism, the continued failure of negotiations, and the absence at this juncture of a viable path towards a political settlement of this matter have all impelled Egypt to call upon the Security Council to intercede expeditiously and effectively to prevent an escalation of tensions and to address this situation which could, as stated in Article 34 of the United Nations Charter, endanger the maintenance of international peace and security. We have come to this chamber out of an abiding faith in the value of international law and an unwavering belief in the virtue of multilateralism as a vehicle for promoting peace and preventing conflict and strife. We are driven by a commitment to the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter and an enduring confidence in the capacity of the Security Council to discharge its duty to maintain international peace and security by taking the necessary action in relation to the question of the GERD. Indeed, the great value to humanity of this body is its ability and authority to act preemptively to protect and uphold the peace, and not to stand by in a state of indifferent abeyance, as the rights of nations and their very existence are threatened. Mr. President, Egypt has engaged in a whole decade of negotiations on the GERD. Since Ethiopia unilaterally commenced the construction of this dam without fulfilling the duties incumbent upon it as an upstream state to notify and consult its downstream co-riparians, Egypt has sought to reach an agreement on the GERD that would preserve the rights of our three countries and promote their common interests. Our hope was and remains to conclude a legally binding agreement that enables Ethiopia to achieve its developmental objectives by generating hydropower from the GERD expeditiously, efficiently, and sustainably. This reflects the fact that Egypt was and remains committed to Ethiopia's stability and prosperity, and it also exemplifies Egypt's long-standing policy of engendering and expanding cooperation with our co-riparians throughout the Nile Basin. However, any agreement on the GERD must be equitable, reasonable, and legally binding. It must include provisions to mitigate the adverse effects of this dam, especially during periods of drought. It must prevent the infliction of significant harm on the riparian interests of Egypt and Sudan. It must guarantee the safety, functionality, and resilience of downstream dams. And it must ensure that Egypt's water security is not imperiled by the filling and operation of what will become Africa's largest hydropower facility. Realizing this objective of concluding a fair and balanced agreement on the GERD is not unsurmountable nor is it beyond reach. Indeed, the continued failure of negotiations is not due to a lack of scientific solutions to the outstanding technical issues, nor is it because we lack the requisite legal expertise to draft an agreement. Rather, the singular source of our failure has been and remains Ethiopian intransigence. This reality is best reflected in the following statement from the letter addressed by His Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia, to the Security Council on June the 23rd, 2021, and I quote, "Filling and operating the GERD without seeking agreement from Egypt and Sudan is the bare minimum of the exercise of this sovereign prerogative as a riparian country of an international watercourse," end of quote. The sentiment in this statement, Mr. President, is the root of the problem. It demonstrates that the cause of this crisis is political. It reveals that Ethiopia is operating under the assumption that it is engaged in negotiations on the GERD out of comity or charity. Ethiopia has conveniently decided to ignore the realities of geography and appears to be under the illusion that the Blue Nile is an internal river that it can exploit to its exclusive benefit. And it seems to presume that this watercourse that freely and naturally flows to the territories of its co-riparians can be subjected to its sovereignty and placed under its dominion. This unfortunate posture has thwarted every effort to reach an agreement and has been echoed in the positions that Ethiopia adopted throughout a decade of negotiations. For instance, Ethiopia refuses to sign a legally binding agreement. It has even objected to calling the instrument being negotiated an agreement, and has proposed to designate the text as merely guidelines and rules. Ethiopia has refused to include any form of binding dispute resolution provisions and insists on codifying an unlimited right to alter and amend the GERD agreement whenever it so desires. Ethiopia has sought to justify these unreasonable positions by invoking some mythical injustice that had been wrought upon it by so-called colonial treaties or by an unfair status quo. Nothing can be further from the truth. Ethiopia was never a colony and has never concluded a treaty relating to the Nile under the threat of coercion or compulsion. Moreover, Egypt has never objected to Ethiopia's right to harness the resources of the Blue Nile. However, Egypt expects and indeed demands that its upstream co-riparian complies with its international legal obligations, which require it to prevent the infliction of significant harm against the interests of its downstream neighbors. Ethiopia is also seeking to use the GERD negotiations as a backdoor through which to consecrate an unlimited and unregulated right to construct future projects along the Blue Nile, and has demanded that its co-riparians sign a hydrological blank check that grants it unrestricted control of the river. This was expressed in no uncertain terms in a letter dated January the 8th, 2021 from His Excellency Ethiopia's Minister of Water, in which he stated, and I quote, "Ethiopia does not have an obligation emanating from law or practice to acquire agreement from downstream countries to construct the GERD or any future water development projects," end of quote. This policy was put into practice when His Excellency the Prime Minister of Ethiopia announced on May the 30th, 2021, that his country plans to construct over 100 dams over the coming fiscal year without even the slightest mention of the interest or equities of its co-riparians, as if Ethiopia holds exclusive proprietary rights over the Nile and the other rivers that it shares with its neighbors, which was especially apparent in the damage inflicted by Ethiopia on Lake Turkana in Kenya. Mr. President, despite Ethiopia's persistent pattern of bad faith and in spite of its incessant unilateralism, Egypt continued to negotiate in good faith and with a genuine political will to reach an equitable agreement. For a whole decade, we explored every avenue and exhausted every opportunity to conclude a document that would enable Ethiopia to fill and operate the GERD while mitigating its harmful downstream impacts. An agreement that would become an instrument of regional integration and collaboration, and that would herald a new era of cooperation between our three countries. We sought an agreement through years of fruitless trilateral negotiations, during which Ethiopia effectively torpedoed our efforts to undertake joint studies on the socio-economic impacts of the GERD and to assess its environmental impacts. And as a result of Ethiopia's obstructionism, we now have no impartial scientific record of the adverse effects of this mega dam. Egypt also accepted an invitation to participate in negotiations facilitated by the United States of America and the World Bank Group, and in which Ethiopia participated fully and freely, and that led to the drafting, after 12 rounds of intensive negotiations, of a comprehensive agreement on the filling and operation of the GERD, which Egypt signed, but which Ethiopia rejected. We also engaged in negotiations held upon the invitation from His Excellency the Prime Minister of Sudan, which, despite significant progress that was achieved, were ultimately undermined by Ethiopian intransigence. Moreover, for a whole year since the previous session convened by the Security Council on the question of the GERD, Egypt participated actively in the negotiations that were led by the African Union. We engaged in this AU-led process with a sense of optimism and faith in the ability of our African brethren to facilitate the adoption of an agreement on the GERD. We worked diligently to implement the instructions of the Bureau of the Assembly of the African Union at the summit level to reach a legally binding agreement on the filling and operation of the GERD. And we welcome the constructive engagement of our partners from the European Union and the United States in this process. However, after a year of faltering negotiations, and despite the highly appreciated good offices and untiring efforts of His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa and His Excellency President Felix Tshisekedi of the Democratic Republic of the Congo during their respective periods as chair of the African Union, the AU-led process failed to yield the desired agreement. Our three countries were even unable to execute the simple task of compiling a complete text of a zero draft of the GERD agreement that provides a record of their negotiating positions. And countless weeks were exhausted in ineffectual virtual meetings and disagreements on peripheral matters of procedure. More troublingly, throughout this process, Ethiopia effectively derailed the AU-led negotiations. It repeatedly attempted to redirect the talks towards reaching non-binding arrangements for the filling of the GERD or for the appointment of focal points for the exchange of technical data. While these ideas may appear reasonable to the untrained eye, the reality is that these Ethiopian proposals contravene the instructions of the Bureau of the Assembly of the African Union at the summit level, which directed us to agree on the rules governing both the filling and operation of the GERD. More importantly, the practical effect of these Ethiopian proposals is to deny the downstream states any meaningful protection against the adverse effects of the GERD, and entitle Ethiopia to fill its reservoir and activate its massive turbines without instituting rules to mitigate the harmful impacts of this dam and regulate its operation, thereby posing a grave danger to our rights and interests. Furthermore, despite claiming to support the granting of an enhanced role to our partners who attended the AU-led negotiations as observers, the reality is that during the latest ministerial meeting held in Kinshasa on April the 4th to the 6th of 2021, upon the kind invitation from His Excellency President Felix Tshisekedi, Ethiopia rejected every proposal submitted by Sudan and Egypt to augment the AU-led process and expand the role of our partners in order to assist us in reaching an agreement on the GERD. As such, I find it deeply disheartening that I must report to the Security Council that the AU-led process in its current format has reached an impasse. A whole year of negotiations was expanded in fruitless talks, while Ethiopia continued the construction of the GERD and has now reached the point of continuing to unilaterally fill its reservoir. Mr. President, throughout these winding and arduous processes and at every juncture of the negotiations, Ethiopia remained implacable. It refused every proposal and rejected every idea presented by Egypt that would have guaranteed that Ethiopia would be able to generate hydropower from the GERD at optimal levels of efficiency while protecting downstream states against the potential harms of this dam. Ethiopia also blocked every compromise formula submitted to us by our international partners and continued to adopt inflexible positions designed to evade and elude any commitment to protect or even provide minimal safeguards to the interests of Egypt and Sudan. Even our efforts to engender confidence and build bridges of trust between our countries came to naught. We signed the 2015 agreement on Declaration of Principles to affirm our commitment to reaching a fair and equitable agreement on the GERD. We presented a plan to establish a common infrastructure fund to broaden the horizons of cooperation between our countries. We proposed to contribute to the financing of the GERD to turn this dam into a symbol of friendship and brotherhood between our countries and peoples. And we suggested to extend our power lines to help energize Ethiopia and assist its quest for development. And still, Ethiopia remained unyielding in its intransigence. As a result, the two downstream states are now left vulnerable to the evils of the GERD. We have no independently verifiable guarantees regarding the safety and structural stability of the GERD. And as such, 150 million Sudanese and Egyptians are condemned by Ethiopia to live under the harrowing specter of a towering structure that can hold up to 74 billion cubic meters of water without assurances regarding its safety or reliability. Nor do we have any protection against the incalculable damage that the GERD can inflict during future periods of drought. At a time when the river grows dry and the land gets parched under the searing sun and the livelihoods of Egyptians is imperiled, Ethiopia is unwilling to release the waters of the Blue Nile to quench the thirst of the downstream valley. Indeed, that is the crux of the problem. All that Egypt has called for and sought is a binding agreement that includes an insurance policy against the harmful impacts of the GERD on Egypt's water security by designing a mechanism through which our three countries could cooperate to collectively bear the burden of addressing future periods of droughts. Unfortunately, however, Ethiopia remains steadfast in its rejection of any form of agreement that provides any meaningful measure of protection to the interests of downstream states. And so, Mr. President, it is not an overstatement to affirm that for Egypt, the GERD is an existential threat. Our estimates and scientific models indicate that this megadam can wreak incalculable damage on Egypt, despite the precautionary measures that we have taken in anticipation of Ethiopia's unilateral filling of the GERD and our tireless efforts at conservation and water reuse. For us, the harm that the GERD might inflict will affect every aspect of the lives of the Egyptian people like a malignant plague. In the absence of an agreement that regulates its filling and operation, the GERD can cause cumulative water shortages in Egypt, amounting to 120 billion cubic meters. It will diminish access to clean drinking water. It could deprive millions of farmers of the water they use to irrigate their fields. It will rob countless families of their income and livelihood. It will destroy thousands of acres of arable land. It will increase desertification and degrade the riparian ecosystem. And it will increase vulnerability to the effects of climate change. This is a situation that Egypt cannot and will not tolerate. It is therefore imperative that for the international community to exert every effort including by acting through the Security Council, to preempt this eventuality and prevent the GERD from becoming a threat to the very existence of Egypt. This requires the Council to unequivocally call upon the parties to reach an equitable agreement on the GERD within a defined timeline, and to encourage them to work diligently and with earnestness to achieve that objective forthwith. Otherwise, if its riparian rights are jeopardized, or if its survival is imperiled, Egypt will be left with no alternative but to uphold and protect its inherent right to life that is guaranteed by the laws and customs of nations and the imperatives of nature. Mr. President, the fact that Egypt has brought this matter, which is of the greatest consequence, to the attention of the Security Council for the second time is a testament to our unshakable faith in the ideals of the charter of this organization, as expressed in its preamble, which affirms our collective commitment to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors, and to unite our strength to maintain international peace and security. We come here in search for a viable path towards a peaceful, amicable, and negotiated solution to this crisis, and to avert the dire consequences of our inability to reach a settlement to this matter. Our hope is that the Security Council will recognize the gravity of the situation and fulfill its responsibility to maintain international peace and security. Our expectation is that this Council will take the necessary measures to ensure that the parties engage in an effective process of negotiation that could yield an agreement that serves our collective interests. Indeed, the people of Egypt and the peoples throughout the region are watching the deliberations of the Security Council today with great interest and high hope. And they look to the United Nations and to this Council as the guarantors of peace and the custodians of the collective will of our human family, and are confident that you will not fail in the discharge of your responsibility in this regard. It is in this spirit that I wish to underscore that in executing the unique responsibility conferred upon the Security Council to maintain international peace and security, the members of this Council are instructed, pursuant to Article 24 of the Charter, to act on behalf of the general membership of the United Nations and in furtherance of the noble purposes for which this organization was established and the principles that guide and inspire its work. And therefore, it behoves the honorable members of this Council to consider the matter that is before us today, not from the narrow lens of your respective national interests, but in light of your collective responsibility to act on behalf of the international community, to preserve the peace and uphold the principles of justice and equity. Accordingly, Egypt calls upon the Security Council to adopt the draft resolution on the question of the GERD that was circulated by the Republic of Tunisia. As evident from the text of this draft resolution, we do not expect the Council to formulate solutions to the outstanding legal and technical issues, nor do we request that the Council impose the terms of a settlement of a riparian dispute on the parties. Rather, this resolution is political in nature, and its purpose, which we believe is eminently balanced and constructive, is to relaunch negotiations according to an augmented format that retains and enhances the leadership of the chairperson of the African Union, and that enables our international partners, including the United Nations, to use their expertise in this area to aid our three countries in their quest to conclude within a reasonable time frame an equitable agreement on the GERD. Indeed, if anything, this resolution aims at implementing and effectuating the outcomes of the two meetings of the Bureau of the African Union Assembly that were held on this matter, which instructed the parties to expeditiously finalize, with the assistance of our partners attending these talks as observers, the text of a legally binding agreement on the filling and operation of the GERD, and called upon them not to take unilateral measures that could jeopardize this process. Adopting this resolution would reaffirm the Security Council's resolve to upholding its responsibility to maintaining the international peace and security, and would send an unequivocal signal of reassurance that it remains committed to the peace and prosperity of our African continent, while failure to take effective action on the question of the GERD would be a disheartening dereliction of duties. Finally, I assure you, Mr. President and members of the Council, that Egypt will exert every effort to reach an agreement on the GERD that upholds the unbreakable bond of brotherhood between our countries and that reflects the timeless kinship among the peoples living along the banks of the Nile River. And I call upon my colleagues, brothers, and sisters in Sudan and Ethiopia to embrace this spirit and redouble our efforts to secure a future of peace and prosperity for our countries and peoples. I thank you.
Je remercie Son Excellence.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Shukri, for his statement, and I now give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Mariam Al-Sadiq Al-Mahdi, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sudan.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
On behalf of God, the Merciful, the Compassionate, President, I should like at the outset to congratulate you for your accession to the presidency of the Council during July, and wish you every success in your work. We extend our congratulations to the distinguished permanent representative of Estonia for their remarkable presidency of the Council last month. I would also like to thank the distinguished members of the Council, and France in particular, for having accepted the request to organize this meeting on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is of great importance to my country. And it underscores the interest of the Security Council to the partnership with the African Union to promote international peace and security, both in Africa and across the world. I also thank Mr. Onanga and Ms. Anderson for their enlightening briefings. I thank the representative of the DRC, in addition, speaking on behalf of the Chair of the African Union. I would also like to thank all members of the Council for their statements and the exchange and sharing of experiences on the functioning and filling of dams. I would also like to pay tribute to my colleague, His Excellency the Egyptian Foreign Affairs Minister, and the Ethiopian Minister of Irrigation, as well as my colleague, the Minister of Irrigation, who is accompanying me. President, Sudan very much welcomes the role and efforts of the African Union since it undertook the negotiation process with the three states concerned on the Renaissance Dam. My country reaffirms the need for this process to continue under the auspices of the African Union, and the need to continue cooperation with it so as to reach a just, equitable, acceptable solution for all the parties. We address ourselves to you today to ask for your support and to call upon you to play a positive role in resolving this thorny dispute. Sudan, above all, reaffirms the fact that we have always admitted and recognized the rights of our neighbor Ethiopia to exploit now and in the future the waters of the Nile. Since the outset, we have therefore supported the construction of this dam, knowing very well that its advantages would not be restricted to Ethiopia alone, upon the condition that its filling and functioning happened according to a legally binding agreement, which takes into account the principles of equitable, reasonable use and exploitation of cross-border water resources without inflicting significant harm on downstream states, and in such a way as to respect the human rights foundations and to promote good neighbourly relations between states. We are aware of the usefulness of this dam to prevent droughts and ensure regular water flow throughout the year. These advantages would be achieved if the Grand Dam is filled and functions in such a way that we are informed of it and understand it. This is indeed one of the principles of the use and rights and laws across the world in this regard. In Africa, we have a number of successful examples which have contributed to the stability of states sharing cross-border rivers. By way of example, the important example of 4 West African states which have continued to manage in cooperation the Senegal River since 1972. Another example is that of 8 African states who have continued to manage jointly the Niger River under a legally binding agreement concluded in 1980. Nevertheless, in the absence of an agreement on the filling and functioning of the dam, the advantages of the Renaissance Dam could become true threats for half of the Sudanese population and for the inhabitants of Egypt. The Renaissance Dam, this gigantic African project, could be a living example of fruitful cooperation for over 250 million African citizens, as long as it is used with full awareness and founded upon cooperation and complementarity. Sudan has huge areas of fertile arable land, which could provide to the 3 countries of the region, even to the whole world, a high level of sustainable food security. Electricity would be provided by Ethiopia, whilst Egypt would provide the capacity regarding processing industries. And the 3 countries could also ensure qualified labour. The dam would, in that way, be an enlightening example of regional cooperation. President, Sudan underscores the importance of the legally binding agreement regarding the filling and functioning of the dam for the following reasons. 1. Protection of human security in Sudan. 2. Protection of Sudanese dams. 3. Protection of the strategic security of Sudan. The existence of an enormous dam, such as the Renaissance Dam, with a 74 billion cubic meter capacity, just a few kilometers from the Sudanese border, and in the absence of coordination with the communities downstream of this river regarding safety measures, could transform it into a direct danger for these communities. Regarding human security, for millennia, the ways of life of millions of Sudanese people consists of living alongside the Nile and its affluents. These communities live essentially from river agriculture, but the Renaissance Dam could modify the way of life of these millions of people and cause a 50% reduction in the in riverland which is usable. This is a price that we could pay as long as these communities could then benefit from regular flow of the Nile whilst also being protected against the devastating effects of floods. However, what we could in no way accept would be for the filling and functioning techniques of the dam adopted unilaterally be a way of terrorizing these citizens, of sweeping aside their dignity, violating their human rights, as Ethiopia did a few months ago by invoking its individual right to decide unilaterally upon the modalities for the functioning of the dam. Ethiopia has in this way unilaterally closed the test case dam on the Steep River in Ethiopia. This led to the drought over a large area of water downstream of the river. Again, last June, unilaterally, Ethiopia notified the Sudanese Irrigation Ministry that it intended to open the dam to allow 2.5 billion cubic meters to pass in just 2 weeks, which caused the ministry, through the media, to inform those living alongside the Stit River of the need to evacuate their homes in 72 hours, just 72 hours. I can leave it to you to imagine the panic and terror which such a decision caused amongst the people. Moreover, last July, Ethiopia also filled the Renaissance Dam during the first year to 5 billion cubic meters without prior notification, which caused a drop in the water level in the Blue Nile quite suddenly, and the total stoppage of 3 water stations for over 3 days in the town of Khartoum, in the city of Khartoum. Not to mention the economic and political consequences, which were considerable of this decision, and which the whole world bore witness to. Finally, the Ethiopian irrigation minister on the 5th of July sent a letter to us affirming Ethiopia's determination to carry out the filling of the dam for the second consecutive year. This causes and will cause considerable damage to Sudan. Ethiopia has thus clearly shown and demonstrated its behavior with regard to the Sudanese citizens in the absence of a legally binding agreement by sweeping aside the neighborly rights and unilaterally using its capacity to manage the dam built in its country, thus imperiling the peace and security of Sudanese citizens. Regarding the protection of Sudanese dams, the Ruseres Dam is 100 kilometers from the Renaissance Dam and measures less than a tenth of the size of the Renaissance Dam in terms of its capacity, its water capacity. This dam irrigates almost 70% of the irrigated agricultural projects in the Sudan, with the other dams generating almost 40% of electricity in Sudan. Therefore, as a result of a regular flow of information on the modalities of filling and functioning of the Renaissance Dam, the safety and security of the Ruseres Dam will be seriously threatened. Moreover, the capacity of the 10 dams to generate electricity and provide the necessary water for strategic projects, part of our Al Jazeera project and other projects which Sudan depends upon for its food security and its agricultural investment, would be doomed to failure. Regarding now the protection of the strategic security of the Sudan, as we have already underlined, 70% of irrigated agricultural projects in the Sudan which currently exist depend upon dams built in the Sudan on the Blue Nile Basin. Therefore, it is crucial for us to be kept abreast of the filling and functioning methods of the Renaissance Dam, so that Sudan can plan now and in the future its agricultural projects. Everybody is aware that the Sudan is now open to the world after the success of our glorious revolution and thanks to the huge sacrifices made by the Sudanese youth and the leading of the revolution by Sudanese women and men with courage and perseverance. Sudan and its name has thus been removed from the list of countries advocating terrorism. And this has been done in a dazzling way for the whole world. The Sudanese people have managed to free themselves of the totalitarian regime which terrorized them and which targeted the communities of Darfur and the east of Sudan. These criminal acts spared none of the Sudanese provinces, and the whole world celebrated this glorious revolution conducted pursuant to a civilian and military partnership, which is a unique Sudanese model, so as to achieve peace, in which it was successful by the signing of the Juba Agreement. Sudan is resolved to continue with its actions to peace, and the Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok is currently chairing the IGAD, where we are working to preserve regional stability in the east of Africa and neighbouring countries in West Africa. Sudan has carried out deep economic reform based upon its faith in cooperation with the rest of the world. Indeed, during the Paris conference, France celebrated the return of the Sudan to the international community and back into the fold by underscoring the opening of the Sudan to the world and its interest to build and found intelligent, smart partnerships in all areas, where agricultural investment would be preponderant. Therefore, attempts by Ethiopia to impose their hegemony in a unilateral manner with regard to the filling and functioning of the Renaissance Dam is extremely serious and threatens to undermine progress and to undermine the promising future which is beginning to appear on the horizon for the Sudan. Ethiopia has been our neighbour for better, for worse, and we are linked by a relationship throughout history of cooperation, solidarity, and a concern to safeguard our common interests by strengthening brotherly relations between our two peoples, which means that we wish to continue down this same path so as to achieve a solution which will preserve the lasting links between our two countries. Based upon our faith in regional cooperation, the Sudan has participated in good faith and effectively in all the rounds of tripartite negotiation on the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam since their beginning in 2011 and until today. I wish to underscore here the colossal efforts made by the Sudan to persuade its two neighbours, Egypt and Ethiopia, to sign the Declaration of Principles in Khartoum in March 2015. We also wish to underline the initiative of Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok in June 2020, which aimed to continue negotiations on the few pending questions in the Washington round in June 2020. Sudan responded to the initiative of His Excellency the Presidency of South Africa and of the African Union in the 2020 session, so as to find an internal solution to this dispute. Sudan has also participated very effectively in all the negotiating rounds for over 6 months. However, the failure of improvement in the negotiating mechanism by conferring a greater role to experts once again has resulted in the failure of agreement. Moreover, Sudan has continued its positive commitment by participating in the last round, called by the President of the DRC and the President who is currently chairperson of the African Union. And in this regard, Sudan submitted a proposal to bolster the African negotiation mechanism by transforming it into a mediation under the auspices of the African Union, or under the African Union leadership, with the participation of the UN, EU, South Africa, the three latter having been observers to preceding negotiations. However, for the same reasons relative to Ethiopian intransigence and its rejection of all proposals put forward, this round was also unsuccessful. President, we dearly hope that the Council will assume its responsibilities in maintaining regional peace and security in a preventative way by strengthening and stepping up negotiations under the auspices of the African Union in the following ways: calling upon the parties concerned to resume negotiations under the auspices of the African Union and allowing international mediators and observers to assume their role so as to facilitate negotiations and reach an agreement. To call upon Ethiopia to abstain from any unilateral measure without prior agreement which could constitute a threat for millions of inhabitants behind the Renaissance Dam. Before I conclude, I should like to say unequivocally that this issue is a just cause. You are called, ladies and gentlemen, to promote a process which continues to meet obstacles, and you can help this process easily, freely, by freeing the courageous people of Sudan from their current suffering, by ensuring that the filling and functioning of the Renaissance Dam happens pursuant to a legally binding agreement. However, silence from the Council would send out the wrong message and would mean would signify a tacit approval of the fact that this unilateral filling was acceptable, with all that this would imply in terms of very serious consequences and very harmful consequences for the interests of the Sudan. Excellencies, members of the Council, to conclude, having seized your august counsel of this question with all its serious implications for sovereignty, security, and for the humanitarian dimension and the sovereignty dimension, of the fact that this jeopardizes international peace and security and constitutes a direct challenge to your Council's mandate under the Charter of the United Nations. By doing this, we have given the Council the opportunity to take anticipatory measures of a rare and historic nature, so that the Council does assume its responsibilities in the various ways it has available to do so, notably through preventative diplomacy, so as to bring the parties back to negotiations and promote African action which all parties had agreed upon, by conferring a greater role upon international observers to help the work of the African Union and the United Nations. To conclude, we confirm Sudan's attachment and its commitment to participate in good faith in all efforts which will allow the parties to achieve an agreement which respects the interests of all the parties. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank Her Excellency Madame Al-Mahdi for her statement. And I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Seleshi Bekele Auladshu, Minister of Water, Irrigation and Energy of Ethiopia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, please accept my best wishes as you steer the work of the Security Council for the month of July. My respectful greetings to members of Security Council. My heartfelt greetings to my brother, Minister Sami Shukri, and my sister, Minister Miriam Al-Sadiq. I also recognize and thank His Excellency, Her Excellency Inger Andersen, and the Special Envoy Parafit Jaffrey for their participation. And also, I appreciate the representative of the AU chair addressing this August gathering. In this meeting and the deliberation of the Council, where a hydroelectric dam is under scrutiny in unprecedented manner, I'm not sure if I'm not the first water minister addressing this Council. Ethiopia believes it is unfitting use of the time and resources of the UN Security Council to discuss the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam. Having said that, Mr. President, it is an honor for me to speak before this august body, voicing the concerns and just causes of my country, Ethiopia. A year ago, on 29th June 2020, under your presidency, Council members encouraged Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan to continue negotiations to resolve the outstanding issues and expressed support for the African Union-led process to facilitate further talks. Ethiopia took part in the negotiation with renewed commitment and good faith to reach a mutually acceptable negotiated outcome under the auspices of the African Union. I would like to pause to give the Republic of South Africa a special recognition and our thanks for effectively facilitating the negotiation under the end of its African Union chairmanship in February 2021. Similarly, Ethiopia commends and stands with the Democratic Republic of Congo, the current chairperson of the African Union, for its relentless effort under trying circumstances, including the repeated disruption of the negotiations. Mr. President, we are dealing with a hydroelectric dam project, which is not the first of its kind in Africa or in the world. We are building a reservoir to store water that will generate electricity by heating turbines. For your information, the GERD reservoir is 2.5 times smaller than that of the Aswan Dam in Egypt. Perhaps what puts the GERD in distinction from other projects is the extent of hope and aspirations it generated for 65 million Ethiopians that have no access to electricity. It is also unique because the construction of this $5 billion dam is financed by the blood, tears, and sweat of ordinary Ethiopians. The GERD is a right dam built at the right place for the betterment of people in the broader region. Our unfortunate inability to utilize the Nile River so far is deeply embedded in the psychology of our people. Two famous Ethiopian proverbs underscore this point. Gowwan bishaan keessa dhaabbatee dheebota, or Yabbayin lij wuha xammaa'u. Both roughly translate to the irony of the tribulations of a poor man who stood in the middle of a river and lamented about experiencing extreme thirst. To change this generational lament, we have nowhere to look but the Abai or Nile Basin, in which 2/3 of Ethiopia's water resources is found. In this mighty river, which we share with our neighbors, our people so hope to extricate themselves of darkness and march towards it by building the GERD. The dam has the fingerprints of Ethiopia's farmers, pastoralists, daily laborers, students, businesswomen and men, and the diaspora throughout the world who eke out a living in extremely difficult circumstances. In equal, if not exceeding terms, Ethiopians have best wishes and neighborly care for their compatriots in Egypt and Sudan. We have all the intention to live together in peace and cooperate for our mutual benefit. The GERD demonstrates this core principle of collective well-being and prosperity. That is why the GERD is one of the regional integration projects under PIDA, the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa. Mr. President, Africa, the cradle of mankind, is currently the youngest continent in the world. Africa is set to reap its demographic dividend by investing in its youth. Similarly, my country, Ethiopia, has 70% of its population under the age of 30. More than 100,000 Ethiopians graduate from higher education every year. Not only that, about 30 million Ethiopians are in schools at various levels of education. Catering to the needs of this growing population is an imperative and existential matter for my country. The lives of Ethiopians that languish on the Sahara Desert attempting to cross into Europe, the migrants in the Middle East that sacrifices their youth to bring a better day for their families, the young boys and girls in migrant prison in Africa and beyond, the barefooted migrants that you see returning to their homeland in mass deportation from the Middle East deserve a dignified life. The GERD is a people's project, and our humble attempt to realize this dream against all odds, we chose to act in spite of the arduous obstacles we faced. Instead of coalescing in this challenge, we struggled to prevail. Little by little, we are overcoming. Mr. President, unfortunately, we are here because Egypt and most recently Sudan have expressed their opposition to this hydroelectric dam. It is important to note that our two neighbors have large and small dams and the canals they have constructed, with absolute disregard to the right of other riparian countries and rejecting Ethiopia's repeated plea for consultation. After a series of initiatives to address the concerns of our neighbors in good faith, we are compelled to conclude that their objection is not as such directed at the GERD, but rather to stop any water use by Ethiopia. The fact of the matter is, we have no viable alternative. Unlike Egypt and Sudan, Ethiopia has no considerable groundwater reserve. We also don't have seawater to desalinate. Nearly 70% of my country's water is in the Nile Basin. Even if we wanted to, even if we try, we cannot avoid utilizing the Nile River. In fact, constructing dams is only part of our focus. Our main objective is maximizing our scarce water resource by rehabilitating nature and preventing further depletion through our Green Legacy Initiative, a prominent initiative of my Prime Minister, Dr. Abiy Ahmed. With an overall goal of planting 20 billion trees in 5 years' time, we planted 10 billion trees in the last 2 years. This initiative, which also consists of a seedling sharing outreach with our neighbors, is part of the Green Belt Initiative of the African Union. We call upon Egypt and Sudan to join this afforestation program that improves resilience and increases water availability. Mr. President, Ethiopia believes that An agreement is within reach, given the necessary political will and the commitment to negotiate in good faith. We have already reached an understanding on a considerable number of the issues. The African Union is seized of the matter and is ably facilitating our negotiation. That is why it is regrettable that our sisterly countries opted to bring the matter to the Security Council. I will not drag you to a discussion of issues on my usual disposition to explain technical details on dams and hydrology. However, I want us to truly appreciate the subject matter we are compelled to discuss, and we are speaking of a hydroelectric dam. For the first time since its establishment, this council is being asked to pronounce itself in a water development project. The Security Council is a political and security organ. It is unhelpful and misguided to present an issue that requires a hydrotechnical solution to this global security body. Mr. President, it must also be clear that the underlying problem for the difference between the three countries is the quest to preserve colonial and monopolistic status quo over the Nile. The approach of trying to solve problems using the mindset that creates them is what blocks our consensus on the GERD. The Security Council is faced with the question to determine whether or not Ethiopians have the right to utilize the Nile River. On behalf of all Ethiopians, I implore our friends in this council and in this wider international community to answer this question. Do Ethiopians have the right to drink from the Nile? Mr. President, as a point of information, allow me to share with you the latest status of the African Union-led negotiation. On 24th June 2021, the AU Bureau of Assembly convened a meeting to discuss various issues, including the GERD. The President of the Democratic Republic of Congo, His Excellency Felix Tshisekedi, briefed the Bureau and introduced his plans for the upcoming negotiations. Unfortunately, the Republic of Sudan didn't attend this high-level meeting. With the absence of Sudan in the Bureau meeting, the two countries have blocked 9 meetings since the June 2020. We should learn by now, Ethiopia doesn't respond well to undue political pressure and interference. Ethiopia will continue to exercise maximum restraint and showcase cooperation because we are forever linked by this majestic river. Whether we like it or not, we will continue to drink from the same river and must learn to live together as a neighbor. I reiterate Ethiopia's long-standing commitment to the AU-led process, underpinned by a belief that Africans have the wisdom, the technical expertise, and most importantly, the agency to address their challenge. We believe the phased approach proposed by President Felix Tshisekedi, the chairperson of the African Union, could help us work towards resolving the quagmire created by the colonial heritage on the Nile Basin that Egypt and Sudan are determined to preserve. Mr. President, allow me also to address the much talked about second-year filling of the GERD. The second-year filling of the GERD happens in July and August of this year. We have proactively provided the necessary data on the modalities for the filling of the dam. Let me be clear. The filling of the GERD is part of the construction process. This is clearly stipulated in the Declaration of Principle our 3 heads of state signed in March 2015. The filling of the dam, Mr. President, is pure physics. And once the dam concrete reaches a certain height, The water either flows through the bottom outlets or overflows the concrete. The dam, as designed, will store water until it reaches the 13.5 billion cubic meters indicated in the filling schedule agreed to by Egypt and Sudan. It is only fair that country that generates 77 billion meter cube of water impounds a small fraction of the annual inflow for its hydroelectric dam. Egypt and Sudan do not need any convincing as to the fortunes they will acquire upon the completion of the dam. In the wise words of Sudanese officials, the GERD is an instrument of regional integration. The GERD for Sudan is what the Aswan High Dam is for Egypt. Here, I'm going out of my way to explain to you the absence of any threat caused by the GERD. However, we shouldn't even have to litigate the benefit Egypt and Sudan will acquire from the GERD to argue for our legitimate share from the Nile. All of us, Nile riparian countries, are there to share both the bounty and the scarcity. None of us ought to stand thirsty watching the others drink. Through the GERD, Ethiopia is summoning this common sense to prevail in the Nile Basin. Therefore, this council should not be dragged into the GERD negotiation in the expedient pursuit of domestic political objectives, as an example. Mr. President, if the Council consents to the path proffered by Egypt and Sudan, it will certainly to be entangled with resolving disputes on all transboundary rivers. Interestingly, other than one island sisterly country of ours, all members of this council have transboundary watercourses. You have dealt with and continued to address differences bilaterally and through basin-wide efforts. The GERD talks and the process we have undergone since 2011 gave us a major lesson. Hopefully, this process will nudge us to work towards our regional mechanism on the Nile Basin. In this regard, it would be regrettable for the Council to circumvent this hope by an unhelpful precedent whereby the member states impose through the Council what they should acquire by good faith negotiation. The Council should resist concerted efforts to turn it into a appellate body on transboundary rivers or negotiation. Mr. President, colonialism and colonial treaties thwarted Africa's ability to utilize its natural resource for the benefit of its people. The Nile Basin countries have recognized this problem and worked towards addressing it. In 1999, we established the Nile Basin Initiative, and in 2010, we adopted the Cooperative Framework Agreement, or CFA, on the Nile after 13 years of negotiation. In this framework agreement, which many of you in this council have financially and technically supported, the Nile Basin countries agreed to share the Nile water in an equitable and reasonable manner. We replaced the colonial and monopolistic claim with accepted principle of international law. This instrument is now awaiting more ratification for entry into force. The insatiable demands of Egypt and most recently Sudan are not about the most issue of the GERD, but about the future development projects in Ethiopia and the other riparian countries. Without an effective CFA and regional mechanism, similar application will inevitably come to this council. Today it is Ethiopia's dam, tomorrow it will be any one of the Nile Basin countries. The Nile belongs to all the people of the basin countries. All the 500 million of us in 11 riparian countries, and the water is enough for all of us. In this regard, we urge our Egyptian and Sudanese brothers and sisters to understand that a resolution to the Nile issue will not come from the Security Council. It can only come from good faith negotiations with due care for the well-being and development of each other. Ethiopia looks forward to continuing the AU-led trilateral negotiation on the GERD. We have the solution at hand, and we can herald good news to the world by concluding a mutually acceptable outcome. Finally, Mr. President, allow me to respectfully request the Council to return this matter to the able and legitimate leadership of the African Union and encourage Egypt and Sudan to seriously and faithfully negotiate to reach a negotiated settlement on the first filling and the annual operations of the GERD. We also request the Council to make this meeting the last of its deliberation on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. There is no subject matter as far from the mandate of the Council as this one. I thank you.
Je remercie
I thank His Excellency Mr. Awolachu for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
In English or in Arabic, would you prefer? Well, thank you. The meeting of the Security Council has just concluded to address the issue of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. I was rather encouraged by the statements of the Council members, who all supported and endorsed that the African Union chairman should continue, and that the three countries, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan, should initiate negotiations under the auspices of the chairman of the African Union, His Excellency President Felix Tshisekedi. They all indicated that there should not be any unilateral action taken. They did, though, fail to mention that Ethiopia has already taken twice unilateral action that has an impact, a negative impact, on the negotiating cycle. We thereby are encouraged that they have demonstrated all the elements that are contained in the resolution that has been draft resolution that has been submitted by the Republic of Tunisia. And therefore we look forward that will reinforce and empower further the efforts of His Excellency President Felix Tshisekedi, the Chairman of the African Union, to initiate an augmented negotiating cycle with the assistance of the United Nations, the United States of America, the European Union, the potentially South Africa, and any other observers that the three states might request. We believe that, again, the statements made related to the colonial nature that has been inflicted on Ethiopia is again fallacious and unhelpful and does not conform to reality. This issue has been extended now. These negotiations have continued over the past 10 years. The unilateralism that is being displayed by Ethiopia threatens the water security of Egypt and Sudan. It does imperil the livelihoods of 150 million inhabitants, and we have not sensed that there is a political will on the part of Sudan. This is not an unresolvable issue. On the basis of technical and the best practices that exist on all of the continents, countries have been able to reach an agreement if the will exists. In this case, Ethiopia has not demonstrated the political will to reach an agreement, and that has been the main obstacle to reaching an agreement, despite the moderation and the flexibility that both Egypt and Sudan has shown. So we look now to the Security Council in its responsibilities in the area of preventive diplomacy to reiterate exactly what the 15 members have indicated in their statements, that they are supportive of the reinitiation of the negotiations under the auspices of the African Union and in an augmented fashion that allows the observers to provide the guidance and the recommendations and the technical expertise that might bring the countries to an equitable and legally binding agreement that can fulfill their aspirations, that responds to their needs, and that diffuses the potential escalation of conflict that will have dire consequences on the region and on the African continent as a whole.
Can we take questions?
Please.
مرحبا سعادة الوزير. من الواضح أن في الكلمات لم يكن هناك تأييد واضح لدور فاعل لمجلس الأمن. معظم الكلمات تجنبت هذه العبارة، دور فعال لمجلس الأمن. في حالة عجز مجلس الأمن عن اعتماد مشروع القرار، ما هي الخيارات التي ستقوم بها مصر والسودان؟ شكرا.
للمجلس بالتأكيد أن يطلع بمسؤوليته والموكلة إليه بحكم ميثاق الأمم المتحدة، بعيدا عن الاعتبارات الوطنية التي قد تؤثر على قراراته لحفظ السلم والأمن. بالتأكيد أنه ما عبر عنه الأعضاء المجلس اليوم من اعتماد لكافة العناصر المتضمنة في مشروع القرار الذي تقدمت به تونس الشقيقة هي الوسيلة لأن يعرب مجلس الأمن عن دعم المسار التفاوضي. أما إذا ما سكت عن ذلك يكون قد أهمل في اطلاع بمسؤوليته، ونحن لا نتصور أن مجلس الأمن يكون في مثل هذا الوضع. فنحن ندعو المجلس للعمل على تناول هذه القضية من المنظور الذي هو الدبلوماسية الوقائية، التدعيم لحل المنازعات بالطرق السلمية، وهذا هي مسؤولية المجلس، ونحن لدينا ثقة بأنه سوف يطلع بمسؤوليته في هذا الصدد.
The negotiation on the draft resolution are going on, but there are some countries on the council that don't want to see this issue further discussed in the Council. So what are your next steps in case the Security Council does not adopt the resolution?
Well, I believe those members should provide us justification and explanation as why they would be derelict in the fulfillment of their duties. This is not a water issue. This is an issue of preventive diplomacy, an issue of conflict resolution, that it relates to the issue of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and its effects and the existential threat that it poses. I think it only reinforces the competence and the necessity for the Council to address this issue. And I think every member will have to provide the justification why they would not address this issue and determine the Council, especially since the draft resolution, once again, reiterates every single thing that was said by the Council members in supporting the African-led negotiations, that it should be reinstated as soon as possible, that it should be enhanced by the presence of the observers, that the three countries should reach a legally binding agreement that regulates the filling and operation of the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The draft resolution has nothing other than those elements. Those elements were echoed in the statements of the members of the Council. So I'm confident that there should be a demonstration of what was said by the endorsement and the adoption of the draft resolution.
Mr. Minister, you said in the Council that Egypt will not tolerate and cannot tolerate the current situation. So are there circumstances where you would consider military action?
The matter of Egypt's protection of the rights of its citizen is inherent and is a matter that necessarily any responsible government would apply itself to. We have been in negotiations now for 10 years. We have indicated our good faith, our flexibility, and will continue to. And in coming to the Security Council, I think is the ultimate demonstration of our desire that the international community assists the three countries at this very dangerous juncture in terms of alleviating the tensions and encouraging the return to negotiations and to conclude those negotiations. As the Minister of Water of Ethiopia said, he seems very willing to embark upon negotiations that he is equally unwilling to terminate, to come to a conclusion. If that is the tactic, as has been for the last decade, then I don't see any resolution of the conflict. But Egypt is committed to the principles and purposes of the Charter of the United Nations, will continue to demonstrate every flexibility and desire to support the African Union process, but at the same time, it will recognizably defend the interests of its citizens, their livelihoods, with all means available at its disposal.
معالي الوزير معظم الكلمات في كل المحاولات الجادة من الدبلوماسية المصرية لوأد هذه الفتنة بين الدول الثلاث، وكانت كلمة سيادتك دالة كثير على هذا الأمر، وأيضا كان هناك تعاون كبير بين مصر والسودان، وتحاول مصر جاهدة أن تذهب إلى الحل السلمي، ولكن هناك تعنت، ما زال التعنت الأثيوبي مستمر. بماذا تفسر سيادتك هذا التعنت؟
كل الإجراءات التي اتخذتها إثيوبيا على مدى ال10 سنوات الماضية، الارتكان دائما إلى المظلومية التي ليست لها أساس من الواقع، لتجنب الدخول في اتفاق ملزم مجرد ينظم عملية الملء والتشغيل للسد. مصر أقرت بأحقية إثيوبيا في إقامة السد، في الاستفادة من المياه، رغم ما قاله وزير الري الإثيوبي الآن. لم تعترض مصر على إقامة السد، ولم تعترض على استغلال إثيوبيا للنيل كمورد للتنمية، وإنما طالبت بأن يتم حماية مصالح مصر المائية وحماية أمن مصر المائي من الأضرار المحتملة في حالة عدم إدارة وملء السد بشكل فيه مسؤولية وفيه مراعاة لمصالح شعبي مصر والسودان. سوف نستمر في دعوة الأشقاء في إثيوبيا بأن يتحلوا بالقواعد القانون الدولي والالتزام بالأعراف الدولية والتجارب في أرجاء العالم التي وصلت إلى حلول. هذا التعنت وهذا الدوائر المفرغة من المفاوضات اللانهائية لا يمكن أن تستمر. لابد أن تكون أي جولة قادمة إذا ما أقر مجلس الأمن ودعم التوجه للرئاسة الأفريقية أن تتم هذه المفاوضات في إطار زمني محدد وبوجود دور متقدم للمراقبين حتى يستطيعوا أن يعاونوا الأطراف على التوصل إلى هذا الاتفاق.
Minister, a quick question. Based on the draft resolution by the Security Council, there is a time limit of 6 months. Now we have seen that the rhetoric have increased among the people. I'm not speaking about the governments, the people of Egypt, people of Sudan, people of Ethiopia. There was just today a large demonstration outside of the UN from the Ethiopian residents here in the United States and citizens. What will be the situation when the 6 months pass and we continue on the same pattern of prolonging the negotiations to reach to nowhere? What is the options by the Egypt and Sudan in this regard? Thank you.
Well, if we take the words of the Minister of Water of Ethiopia at heart, he has mentioned that a great progress has been achieved in the negotiating an agreement, that it is possible to reach an agreement. So we don't see why that should not be the case within the 6 months period, to contend that it is not. Unfortunately, the minister did not give any explanation why Ethiopia refused in Kinshasa to accept the reinitiation of negotiations, why it did not accept in the final document of the Kinshasa meeting that it would be clearly stated that the purpose of these meetings is to reach a legally binding agreement on the filling and operation of the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. I think it's incumbent on the international community to recognize all of these issues and to interpret them in the right way. But certainly negotiations of a never-ending nature with, at the same time, the continuation of the construction of the GERD and its unilateral filling really creates a situation where negotiations are counterproductive and will not reach any conclusion other than to reinforce the unilateral nature of the Ethiopian policies.
الوزير رضا أبو شفرة من سكاي نيوز عربية. اليوم خلال كلمته قال المندوب الروسي اقترح وساطة بين الأطراف. ما هو تعليقكم على ذلك؟ شكرا.
نحن نرحب بكل الجهود التي قد تبذل على مستوى الدولي. كل الأطراف التي لها القدرة والرغبة في معاونة الدول الثلاثة نحن نرى في ذلك دائما موقف إيجابي نتفاعل معه ونقبله، ونأمل أن يكون ذلك أيضا الموقف الروسي في مجلس الأمن ودعمه للقرار تعبير آخر عن هذه الرغبة التي عبر عنها مندوب روسيا خلال الاجتماع والكلمات التي ألقاها اتصالا بالرغبة في التوصل إلى اتفاق.
Mr. Minister, may I ask a question on...
الخطوة التالية هي في الحقيقة لدى المجلس وأعضائه. الخطوة هي تتوقف على اطلاع المجلس وأعضائه بمسؤولياتهم وفقا لميثاق الأمم المتحدة والعمل على احتواء التصعيد والعمل على حل الخلافات بالطرق السلمية وأيضا دعم المسار الأفريقي. هذه المنظمة وهذا المجلس هو لسان حال المجتمع الدولي ويجب أن يطلع بمسؤوليته. شكرا جزيلا.
سيادة الوزير لو سمحت سؤال أخير لو سمحت. مندوبة فرنسا والاتحاد الروسي أعرب عن قدرة بلديهما في المساهمة في التقريب لوجهات النظر في كلمتهما التي ألقياها داخل مجلس الأمن. كيف ترون هذه الدعوة أو هذا التوجه الفرنسي الروسي؟
مرة أخرى نرحب بكل دعم للأطراف للتوصل إلى اتفاق قانوني ملزم ولكن لابد أن أؤكد مرة أخرى أنه الجانب الإثيوبي يرفض أن يدخل في اتفاق قانوني. الجانب الإثيوبي يرفض أن يكون للاتفاق تسمية اتفاق، وإنما يسعى أن تكون قواعد إرشادية. يرفض بأن يعتمد آلية لفض المنازعات. يرفض أهم شيء أن يعتمد قواعد للتعامل مع الجفاف والجفاف الممتد، وهو أمر قد لا يحدث، ولكن لا بد أن يكون للشعب المصري والسوداني ما يطمئنهم بأنه في حالة حدوث هذا الجفاف، في حالة حدوث هذه الآثار الطبيعية، فلا بد أن تتعامل إثيوبيا في إدارة السد بما لا يؤدي إلى وقوع أضرار جسيمة على مصر والسودان. بالتالي هذه هي القضايا التي أحجم الجانب الإثيوبي عن تناولها، التي يغفل أن يذكرها في كل مناسبة، ونأمل أن يكون لتدخل المجلس والقرار الذي قد يعتمده ما ينبه الجانب الإثيوبي إلى ضرورة أن ينصاع إلى إرادة المجتمع الدولي. شكرا جزيلا.
Hello, good afternoon. I am Muhammad Al-Bahi, the Charge d'Affaires of Sudan. It is my very special pleasure to introduce Dr. Mariam Sadiq Al-Mahdi, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Sudan, to briefly brief you about the discussion the Council has just concluded on the GERD and to take up a couple of questions. Welcome, Madam Minister.
Thank you very much. Hello, good afternoon, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really grateful for your attendance. We just concluded a very important emergency session on the status of the GERD. It was a very good chance for all of us to present our case. Actually, Sudan demanded or requested of the UN Security Council to convene this session. It is now the second session in a row since last year to concern or addressing the status of the GERD. What we have heard there is really encouraging that this is a very important matter that is taking the interest of the world because it is a matter of imminent threat to the stability and the security of an important region in the eastern part of Africa, and that though the people already got engaged for more than 122 months in lengthy negotiations without reaching an agreement, and that there is a need for imminent or direct support for the African-led process to be augmented to finalize a legally binding agreement. The problem here, already the filling of the dam started since last year. This didn't only threaten the strategic security of water for Sudan and Egypt, but also it inflicted direct harm to the people of Sudan last year and this year. So for this case, we are calling for the UN Security Council to encourage the three parties to engage in the African Union-led process and to be supported and augmented by the international partners, the United Nations itself, and the United States, and the European Union, as well as the South Africa. For this to conclude the legally binding agreement within a limited period of time, we suggest 6 months, not more than that. And we believe it's very possible if the political will is available. What we heard of the members is encouraging, and we believe we will have something that helps supporting and in preventive diplomacy to prevent this important region into falling into any conflicts or more conflicts, as we hope. How do you take the chances?
على الرغم من الكلمة التي وجهها الوزير سامح شكري وبيان كيف سيكون سوء الملء الأحادي من إثيوبيا، وأيضا كلمة سيادتك والأضرار التي ذكرتيها في كلماتك التي وقعت من جراء المآخذ أو الإجراءات الأحادية من إثيوبيا، جاءت كلمة وزير الري الإثيوبي أيضا مخيبة للآمال، وأيضا استمرار في التعنت الإثيوبي في هذا الشأن. كيف تري سيادتك هذه الكلمة بعد كلمة وزير الري؟
كلمة وزير الري كانت كلمة متوقعة تماما. هو نفسه أرسل رسالة منذ 3 أيام وهو يعلم بانعقاد هذه الجلسة التي تدعو لأن يكون أي ملء قائم على اتفاق. هو أرسل رسالة تكاد تكون تهديدية لكل من السودان ومصر يعلن فيها أنهم سيبدأوا الملء الثاني. بالتالي لذلك نحن نعتقد أنه هو أعطى قوة لطلبنا بانعقاد مجلس الأمن ليتابع هذه القضية، لأنه كان في البعض متخوف أنه أن تطرح قضية مياه لأول مرة في هذا المجلس، ولكن الطريقة التي عرض بها وزير الري الإثيوبي أمره هي ليست قضية مياه، هي قضية دولة تتعامل مع المياه كسلاح لتهيمن به على جيرانها، وبالتالي تحولت إلى مسألة مباشرة تختص بالأمن والسلم الدولي.
Madam Foreign Minister, how optimistic, Madam, here, excuse me.
الإثيوبي أن يلعب دورا بين أن يلعب على الخلافات بين مصر والسودان. حاول أن يقول إن السودان موقفها مختلف عن الموقف المصري، لعب هذا الخطاب. يعني هل ترين أن هناك فروقا حقيقية بين الأضرار التي ستلحق بالسودان والأضرار التي ستلحق بمصر، وهل سيبقى الموقفين السوداني والمصري متحدين هكذا في مواجهة هذا الخطر الداهم؟ شكرا.
أشكرك جدا على هذا السؤال. الحقيقة أنه الوزير الإثيوبي حاول أن يقول أن السودان غير موقفه ليتبع مصر، لم يقول بأنه هناك خلافات، وهذه هي الطريقة المؤسفة التي للأسف اتبعتها إثيوبيا. كذلك الفتنة هي التي حاول عدة مرات الدخول فيها أن هناك اختلاف ما بين العرب والعرب الأفارقة، ولذلك كان في هجوم على موقف جامعة الدول العربية، الموقف المعتدل، الموقف الذي حرص على البلاد الثلاثة. أيضا في هذه المرة حاول أن يقول أن هناك مشكلة ما بين دولتي المصب والممر مع بقية دول الحوض. هي للأسف كل المخاطبة الإثيوبية لفراغ من محتوى حقيقي واعتماد الكبير على تزييف الحقائق بتحاول أن تصرف الأنظار بنوع من الفتن للأسف. لذلك أما فيما يخص موقف السودان ومصر، موقف السودان ومصر متحد في قضايا محددة مبدئية، أننا نحتاج لوجود اتفاق قانوني وملزم، ولكن عندما ندخل في تفاصيل هذا الاتفاق انشغالاتنا فيها اختلاف، وقد ظهرت بوضوح في هذا التقديم، وهو أمر لا غبار عليه. نحن البلد المباشر القريب من السد الكبير، آثار حجمه المباشرة على سكاننا وعلى أحجام سدودنا تأثير مختلف جدا من مصر اللي هي بتبعد سدها الكبير اللي بيحمي مصر، السد أسوان العالي، هو يبعد حوالي 2000 كيلومتر من سد النهضة الإثيوبي، وهو في مساحته أو في حجمه 2.5 مرات من حجم السد النهضة. لذلك هو يحمي مصر من نوع المخاطر التي نتعرض لها في السودان. بالتالي نحن ننشغل جدا ومشغولون بضرورة أن يكون الاتفاق الآن. بالنسبة لمصر انشغالاتها بتكون وفي الحقيقة قائمة عندما في المستقبل كيفية ستكون الملء بالنسبة للسد العالي إذا حصلت فترات للجفاف الطويل الممتد. هذه قضية بالنسبة لمصر قضية كبيرة وحيوية، لأنها بتأثر على أمنها المائي الاستراتيجي على المدى الطويل. أيضا إثيوبيا عندها انشغالات في هذا الاتفاق، اللي هو ما هي الطريقة التي يمكن أن تقوم بها بعمل أو لا تقدر أن تقوم بها بعمل مشاريع مستقبلية أخرى في النهر. بالتالي كون أن نحن الدول الثلاثة عندنا انشغالات مختلفة، هذا لا يقدح في أنه هذه أمور مهمة يجب أن تدرس. نحن في السودان لدينا انشغال كبير وحقيقي، وهي الآثار الاجتماعية والآثار البيئية المباشرة من هذا السد، وهي انشغالات لنا نحن الثلاثة. بالتالي نعم، هناك عندما ندخل إن شاء الله في الاتفاق هناك انشغالات مختلفة، ولكن يجب أن نتوافق عليها كلها ونجد معادلات كسبية لنا فيها كلها. ولكن الأمر الذي فيه الآن نتفق مع مصر ونختلف فيه مع إثيوبيا أننا ندعو لأن يكون ونعمل أن يكون هناك اتفاق قانوني ملزم الآن قبل أي ملء، وإثيوبيا ليست حريصة على هذا الأمر.
One last question in English, please. In English.
What is your position, Madam Foreign Minister? What is your position on the? Thank you. My name is Ibtisam Azim from Al Arab Al Jadid newspaper. What is your position on the draft resolution, and are you optimistic that the Security Council will adopt it? And what's your next step if the Security Council doesn't get to an agreement? Thank you.
Thank you. This is an important question. We are very much optimistic that the Security Council will address this matter in a responsible way, and it will not just be dropped from its agenda. There are some, we have heard some apprehensions or queries from some of the members that they might not be very much enthusiastic to have a resolution, because the resolution, first of all, creates a precedent. Secondly, for such matters. Secondly, it is another thing that they are not very much keen to address water issues, as well as they don't want to have something to seize the matter continuously. And I think this being said, it is not how to put it. It is not good enough to let this important August organization to drop out this very important matter. And as we said inside, this is a time, a precedent for the UN Security Council to have preventive diplomacy, not as peacekeeping missions, but preventive diplomacy at looking at early warning signs, and have the preventive measure of building the trust in a very important regional organization like the African Union, as well as building the trust between very important countries like Sudan, Ethiopia, and Egypt.
You think diplomacy still has
معالي الوزير عبد الله يباسي من القناة الحرة، معظم كلمات المتدخلين ركزوا على الدور الاتحاد الإفريقي أو الدور الإفريقي من أجل الوصول إلى تسوية. هل أنتم لازلتم مؤمنون بهذا الدور، بالدور الإفريقي؟
نعم.
أم أم أن هذه الدور الاتحاد الإفريقي استنفذ مهمته بالتالي لجأتم إلى مجلس الأمن؟
لا لا أبدا، هذا سؤال مهم جدا، لأنه ما نريد أن يفهم بوضوح أننا من حرصنا على الاتحاد الأفريقي نريد للاتحاد الأفريقي أن يعضد دوره بتعاون مع المجتمع الدولي، مع الأمم المتحدة. نحن في السودان لدينا مثال حي. في السودان هناك بعثة مشتركة كانت في السودان، بعثة الأمم المتحدة والاتحاد الأفريقي يوناميد، وأنهت عملها بصورة جيدة ومرضية، والآن تخرج عن السودان. بالتالي نحن في العام الماضي اتكأنا مباشرة على الاتحاد الأفريقي، ولكن الاتحاد الأفريقي لأسباب موضوعية عرضها علينا السيد موسى فكي مؤخرا، اللي هو المفوض رئيس المفوضية الاتحاد الأفريقي. الاتحاد الأفريقي يحتاج لهذا التعزيز من المجتمع الدولي، تعزيز في المسائل اللوجستية، تعزيز في المسائل الفنية والخبرات. وبالتالي نحن في السودان كنا قد نادينا منذ أول هذا العام بتعزيز دور الاتحاد الأفريقي، مع تأكيد قيادة الاتحاد الأفريقي بوجود الشركاء الدوليين، الأمم المتحدة والولايات المتحدة والاتحاد الأوروبي بجانب دولة جنوب أفريقيا. أنا شاكرة لكم كثير.
Well, it's not going to be me, it's going to be the minister. Well, hello, good afternoon. I'm sure the Arabic language media will be more interested on this press briefing. And again, thank you very much. I have here with me Dr. Salashi Bakala, Minister of Water, Irrigation and Energy of Ethiopia. What we are going to do today is that we are going to speak the truth, but in the meantime, we are going to be very prudent and careful in our words. We're going to avoid that perpetual rage and sentiment, because we are destined to live together. So having said that, Dr. Salashi, the mic is yours.
Thank you all very much for your interest. And let me say a few words, and I'll take your questions later. As I told the Council, perhaps I'm the first water minister addressing the August body on hydroelectric dam that is under scrutiny in the unprecedented and unfair manner here at Security Council. We believe, Ethiopia believes, it is an unfitting use of the time and the resources of the UN Security Council to discuss the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam. Nevertheless, I have voiced the concerns and the just causes of my country, Ethiopia. Let me reiterate that we are dealing here with a hydroelectric dam. We are not building a nuclear plant, which is not the first of its kind in Africa or in the world. The world has many experience on hydroelectric dam. We are building a reservoir to store water that will generate electricity. After heating the turbine, the water continues to flow in the downstream. GERD is actually a people's project. All walks of Ethiopians are contributing to build this dam to bring light home to 65 million people who are currently living in darkness. The Nile belongs to all peoples of the basin countries. In the basin, we have 500 million in 11 riparian countries. Ethiopia generates 77 billion cubic meter water annually. And in fact, 85% of the Nile is coming from Ethiopia. Equally, Ethiopians have best wishes and neighborly care for their compatriots in Egypt and Sudan. We have all the intention to live together in peace and cooperate for our mutual benefit. The GERD demonstrates these core principles for collective well-being, prosperity, and regional integration. Ethiopia has 70% of its population under the age of 30. More than 100,000 people are graduate from higher education, and 30 million Ethiopians are in school. It is an imperative, therefore, to cater the growing need for this population. Finally, Ethiopia believes that an agreement is within reach, and given the necessary political will and the commitment to negotiate in good faith. We have already reached an understanding on a considerable number of issues. So the African Union is the right platform to deal with this kind of issue, to really bring a conducive environment for faithful negotiation. Thank you very much. I can now you can ask me your questions.
Over here.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Ray Boushafra from Sky News Arabiya. In today's session, most of members of Security Council, they talked about a solution that come to satisfy all the parties of the conflict, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. Which kind of solution do you think, in your point of view, will come to satisfy all the parties? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. It's actually solutions that satisfies the three countries. The negotiating parties solution is solutions that works for all of us is very important. So we are working towards that. To look into rules and guidelines that could be concluded that works well for everyone in a win-win cooperative that is based on equitable and reasonable utilization without causing significant harm principles.
Egypt and Sudan, they are accusing Ethiopia that you don't want any kind of solution and you just go into unilateral steps without consulting the other parties. Thank you.
No, it's the other way around, actually. We always go to negotiation with solution at hand. We take a draft rules and guidelines agreement to put it on the table, and these parties always disrupt. In fact, during the last 9 meetings, they disrupted. Ethiopia has never disrupted any meeting. Wanted always to continuously engage and solve. And we have seen already solution at hand for first feeling since about 1 year. But the parties didn't want to conclude that first feeling agreement. It would give us more time actually to negotiate the more complex issues of comprehensive agreement.
Mr. Minister, Ethiopia said in different statements of Ethiopian officials that this is a matter of sovereignty and that you also have more plans for more dams on the river in the future. Are you still considering this matter as a sovereignty matter to Ethiopia and nothing else? And what about the future plans on other dams?
Well, Ethiopia has future needs, current needs and future needs. Currently, as you know, 65 million people are without electricity, but if you go further downstream, 100% access to electricity. Hydropower is one of the solutions. If you take drinking water, about 25 million people are without access to clean water in Ethiopia. We have to drink water. We have to treat and then provide solution for our people. So that is what it implies. We have to establish secured food production. We cannot continue to migrate everywhere in the world. We have to really produce adequate food, supply adequate water, supply electricity, and create jobs. As I indicated, 70% of 150 million are under 30 years. These people should have a future. We have to establish that future. Nice.
Mr. Minister, James Bays from Al Jazeera. You said in the Council that you felt that an agreement at the AU was something that you could reach. Why then, at the moment, do you not suspend the filling of the dam as a gesture of goodwill to get those negotiations going again?
Thank you for raising that question. I know. Currently, all dams in the Nile Basin are filling. The reason being, it's a rainy season. July, August, and September, bountiful water. In fact, it is creating problems by creating havoc in the form of flood. It's a real opportunity, actually. GERD provides that opportunity of protecting against flood. There is no really an issue. Second, when you see it from Ethiopian context, we contribute 77 billion cubic meter to the Nile. It's only fair to take 13.5 to fill our dam. We're not building African white elephant, not to fill the dam, but actually fill and operate and utilize it. So it's really logical on issues that matter actually about the operation of the dam in future. We have to come to conclusion, how do we handle if drought occurs? Ethiopia stretching its hand, it will utilize some of its reserve storage actually to help downstream countries so that they will not be harmed by extreme droughts. As long as water is in the reservoir of above certain quantity, we cooperate. That is the way to go, actually. Not prevent Ethiopia's investment from meager resource we have at hand, contribution of all poor people in Ethiopia working around the dam to realize the opportunity. So it doesn't harm anybody, believe me. It's also the right of Ethiopia because we contribute 77, taking 13.5 is not a real issue. It is well within the limit of Ethiopia's equitable share.
Mr. Minister, the ambassadors of Russia and France, they expressed, their view that their countries, they can help to facilitate the discussion between the three parts. Yeah, Russia and France in the Security Council, they expressed that their countries, they are willing to help to close the gap between the three parts. What's your comment on?
We don't have problem. Anybody can come with solution and advise any country, individually or collectively. We don't have with this kind of support coming from our partners. But we are negotiating in actual negotiation. We are handling the issue in a rule-based, according to the Declaration of Principle, in a faithful manner, in non-aggressive way. So we are moving forward. The world has a lot of experience. We are not building the first dam in the world. Europe has thousands of dams. US, Africa has very good experience and best practices in managing river basins like Niger, Limpopo, Zambezi, Senegal. We can draw experience from those rivers and live in peaceful manner so that we can develop rule-based policy.
Abdullah Imasi from Al Hurra. My question is, what are Ethiopia's options if Egypt and Sudan insist on making the issue before the upcoming Security Council sessions?
Say it again, please. Can you repeat?
What are Ethiopia's options if Egypt insists and Sudan insists on making the issue in front of the Security Council in the next
Security Council
sessions?
is not a place for this kind of negotiation. As I explained, it's the first case, the water resource development case. Water resource development case or development case is not the issue of the Council. The Council is looking into issues of security and political issues. Here, we have a development project. Most of the Council members actually emphasize that we go back to African Union, lead negotiation, conclude result on faithful negotiation.
Willing to work? Are you still willing to collaborate with the African Union?
Absolutely, we are working on that. We have never boycotted the African Union meeting.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you.